Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chatty AF, the anime fem podcast. My name is Vrai Kaiser, writer, contributor, and occasional editor for AniFem. And this week we are doing a retrospective for Revolutionary Girl Utena's 20th anniversary. And with me are Caitlin Moore and Dee Hogan.
Hi, I'm Caitlin.
Hi, I'm Dee.
We'll save plugs for the end, but what do you guys do for the site?
I moderate, I edit, I will contribute. Just not yet.
She's working on a big intro post, make a big splash.
Don't say that, oh god.
No pressure though.
Don't do things halfway.
I'm sort of the contributor liaison, I guess. I also do writing and just kind of some general organizational stuff for us. I keep the Trello board going and make sure that we get the contributors assigned to editors and all that good stuff.
A peek behind the curtain. It's all very exciting.
It is. It's riveting back here.
Oh, before we go any further, because God, I hate to hear about this kind of thing, I have neutral pronouns, because people always think my voice sounds weirdly feminine. That's enough of that social justice business. But as I said, the point of convening this podcast today is basically for us to geek out about Utena, and it is a handy excuse that it has been 20 years since its initial release now.
Wow.
Jeez, yeah.
I know, right?
That's pretty crazy. It's been, for me, 15 years since the first time I saw it, I think? Maybe even longer than that.
Something like that for me, too, yeah.
You guys...
16 years.
I am in fact the baby here. I didn't see it until 2009. I found it during that unfortunate dead space between when Central Park Media had closed its doors but before Nozomi rescued the license. So I watched...
You know what? Actually, that is not the worst time to have come into it.
Oh,
I was going to say, Vrai, you are like a little baby. Watch this.
Yeah, because for a very long time, Central Park Media released the first arc. But then they went, about a decade without releasing anything else.
Yeah, it was years. They lost the license or something, and then we just didn't get the Black Rose and the Apocalypse Saga for years in any form in the U.S. So if you wanted... again, some kind of licensing issue, because then somebody else licensed the movie. So we had the movie before we had the rest of the TV series. I'm pretty sure.
Eventually they did get all of it, though. I remember because I bought the full series box set.
Oh, I remember those.
When I was in college.
They're very pastel.
It came with a T-shirt.
Fancy.
Men's extra large, black with a print of that official art where Utena has both Touga and Saionji clinging to her.
The weird three-way art.
Yeah.
Why would that be the shirt of choice?
No homo, though. That's the most no homo art they could pick.
I guess.
That's not technically incest.
Yeah.
There's
not a whole lot of art they can use from the show that's not technically incest.
Yeah. Wow, I thought that I had an adventure watch. So I definitely did watch most of the Black Rose saga with you desperately utilizing my bad high school Spanish skills because those were the only subtitles available, but...
Oh my gosh, that's pretty fantastic. My friend and I, we got the originals on VHS at the local store, and then we were like, well, we have to find the rest of it now. So we went on our very first ever, we're I think 7th graders at this point, our first ever eBay quest to track down the rest of the series, and we found some guy selling CD-ROMs with fan subs on them. And so we had those shipped to our house, and we pulled the couch up to the computer, and we huddled around the computer, and we watched the last 2 core of Utena. That is how we did it, was via fan subs.
Oh, that's precious.
That was the moment. I remember we popped the disc in, and we looked at each other, and we went, okay, this is the point of no return. We're giant nerds, and it's never going to get better. And yeah, that was That was how I watched Utena the first time.
And this is not a show you want unreliable subs for.
No, it's not. Like, which, so when I watched it, I checked out a couple of VHS copies of the first couple of volumes from Blockbuster. Mm-hmm. And that was how I saw the first few episodes. And then I went for quite a while without seeing the rest of even the Student Council saga.
Oh, wow.
But when I went to Anime Expo one year, it was the year that all of the... Because VHS... the VHS were like $30 each.
Oh, my God, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't have that kind of money. I didn't get an allowance in high school. So... it was just out of the question. But then one year I went to Anime Expo and they were having like all those closeouts on the VHS because DVD was coming in hot. Mm-hmm. And so I bought the rest of what was out, which wasn't much. It was just a Student Council saga at that stage. But two of the videos I got were dubbed.
I was going to ask, did you get them dubbed or subbed? So you watched it, so you watched part of it dubbed. I watched the entire first half dubbed. I mean, the first core dubbed because there just wasn't a subtitle version available to us.
Oh no.
Yeah, that dub is famously bad.
It's not I'm a fan of dubs, but it's not a good dub at all.
Yeah, like I like dubs.
Yeah, yeah, I enjoy dubs. I honestly, I have kind of a weird fondness for it because there's a few voice actors in it who I really like, and it's not their best work by any stretch.
Crispin Freeman, I'm guessing?
Crispin Freeman nailed Touga.
Rachel Willis does a really good job with Utena. I liked her. Again, not her best work, but I liked her as Utena. But God, like, the person who played Anthy was just bad.
I will say that I find it unfitting and yet kind of amazing that Dan Green plays Mikage. Yeah, it's amazing.
Huh.
Wow.
I'm not even sure if I've ever seen the Black Rose dubbed.
I mean, like,
Yeah,
don't.
I've never watched past
Don't, definitely. Because I think I kind of tried, and I really didn't like the guy they got to play Akio, and then I caught a little bit of Mikage and wasn't really feeling it, and then I was like, you know what? I'll just watch this in subs. The subtitle cast is incredible, so let's just do that.
Oh, man. Tomoko Kawakami, like, as Utena, just blew me away. God.
Destroys my soul.
Rest in peace, though. Rest in peace.
Oh.
Because she passed away a few years ago.
I remember.
Yeah.
It was sad.
Have you guys ever heard of Ursula's Kiss?
Isn't that the UK release of the movie?
No. Well, I don't know. Maybe. But it is an alternate universe version of Utena.
Okay.
Where all of the names are changed. The world of anime licensing is really strange and confusing, and there's all these like intermediary companies, and one of them picked up the Utena license to sell to dubbing companies, and I guess they did like sample plot summaries, and they changed all of the names.
Okay.
Like Utena was Ursula. Let me see if I can find like
I mean, above everything else that is 90s localization, that's the name you want to sell your heroine under, like, within 5 years of The Little Mermaid.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Gosh. Well, Utena becoming Ursula isn't even like the worst one. There's also Mikage was Sunny. Mitsuru was Mitch.
At least that one kind of makes sense. Like, you can see how they got to that name.
Wakaba is Wanda.
Sure.
It starts with the same letter. That's all that 90s dubs required.
Pretty much, yeah.
Sunny is the one that kills me.
Please tell me they called Touga, like, Tommy or something, because that's the most 90s move you could do.
It might have been... Yes! Yes, it was, actually!
Tommy.
I know my 90s dubs.
Sally was, or Shiori became Sally, and Saionji became Kevin Simon.
That kind of fits him. I can see that.
That is a very that is a young man who plays lacrosse and has a sweater tied around his shoulders. Yeah, that works for Saionji.
Yeah, it does. It's a very punchable name, so that works.
I have a certain soft spot for Saionji, but also there's no denying he's such a prick.
Yeah, no, I have. It's your fault, Vrai. I now have a huge sympathetic soft spot for Saionji when we did the recent rewatch. Yeah, now I have a ridiculous amount of sympathy for him.
Yeah, Saionji is one of those characters that, like, in real life is not a person that you should have to deal with in any way while they're, like, causing hell for the rest of people in life and are just terrible. But in fiction, you can, like, take a step back and be like, well, okay, you are also the victim of terrible toxic masculinity and a system that's jerking you all over the place.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really love about Utena is I feel that way about pretty much every character. Is there's that element of, it's even the ones where you're like, I would want nothing to do with you in the real world, and you're kind of awful. They do such a good job of sort of fleshing out their backstories and showing how they got to be where they are and sort of what their motivations are, that you end up sympathizing with just about everybody at some point.
Even if they're awful.
Yeah, even if they're really bad.
Except Akio, who I think is just awful, but is also really fun to watch.
I hate Akio. There's the one moment, though, when you get their backstory, where you kind of feel bad for him.
Oh, yeah, I suppose we should go... I mean, if you've made it this far in, you're probably fine, but we are definitely going full spoilers with this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we assume if you're listening to this...
Utena without spoiling it.
Yeah, so we assume if you're listening to this, you know what we're talking about, so...
You have received the secret code. You checked under your mailbox in the bird's nest.
Yeah, whenever I recommend Utena to people who haven't watched it, I'm just like, oh, this is, this incredible, like, feminist work, but I cannot explain why, because I honestly think going in as fresh as possible with Utena is the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. Like, some stuff is with spoilers, but whenever I talk about Utena, it's just like, go in, just trust me, just watch it. I know it's gonna seem really rough for a while, but just go watch it.
It is interesting, because I know my, because I told my girlfriend I was doing this podcast, and she mentioned she watched the show probably around when you guys did, and had a real hard time with those first few episodes, because she kind of figured they were doing like a not like other girls thing with Utena and Anthy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because that's actually something I've been thinking about lately, is how, and I'm sure this applies to other people, my relationship with the character Utena changed sort of as I grew up. Mm-hmm. And at first she really did appeal to me as this sort of like not like other girls character. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. And I think I related to that a lot growing up, because I didn't really do the sort of traditionally expected feminine behaviors, dress, mm-hmm. things like that. I wanted to play basketball with the guys, and I wanted to, hang out with my friends and not worry about going on dates. And so I didn't, because I was 13 the first time I watched it, I didn't really get like the deeper levels of the series, but having that character who was, heroic and the protagonist, and I was able to relate to them like that, still meant a lot to me, even though I didn't fully understand the feminist messages that were kind of embodied in the story.
Well, and I think Utena is a character you can grow up with, because she is a good person. She tries her best. It's just that so many of her problems state from the fact that she's selfish in a way that's pretty natural for young people before you kind of learn to empathize with others.
Yeah.
Right, she's 14.
Right. She is a dumb baby. They all are.
Right, and like all of the characters except for Akio, they do this awful shit, but it's all because they don't know better, and that mm-hmm. and that's honestly like that's the stated thesis of the show. It's about how adulthood is almost like can be a corrupting influence. Mm-hmm.
And yet, like, adolescence is this sort of savage garden where you you mean well, and you are this like big you are this gestating object of potential, to use their weird egg metaphor.
I was gonna say a chicken and egg, mayhaps.
Yes, mayhaps. But like also you have this concept of, because you're in a shell, you can't see other people who are not yourself, and that causes you to do cruel things.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably a good point to ask, because I always think it's sort of an interesting reflection on viewer. Who's your favorite character?
Okay, so favorite just in terms of, well, because like to me, I guess I have like a favorite character who's just like the character I enjoy and who I like. And then there's also the favorites who are more the characters who are the most interesting to me, even though I wouldn't necessarily want to like hang out with them on a weekend.
Right.
So in terms of just like pure favorite, maybe this is boring, but I just really like Utena. I always have, and I think I always will. Her growth throughout the story is very inspiring to me. And again, it seems like every time I've watched the show, something about that character has resonated with me. And like you said, I mean, she's short-sighted and she's naive and she does some things sort of selfishly, even though she's kind of trying to do things for other people. And so she is an admirable figure too, despite her flaws. And I've just always liked that about her. So I think that would be like my sort of knee-jerk, my heart says favorite character would be Utena.
Yeah, I agree. Utena is, they're all really great characters, but Utena is just so close to my heart. She's out there, she's doing her best, she's fucking up. I mean, she's just, seeing her try so hard and so hard and so hard, and seeing her just so destroyed at the end is really hard.
This is why we actually need the movie.
But yeah, she's really always resonated with me in that way, because I'm a person who tries hard and then finds out that I've been fucking up all along.
Hashtag relatable.
Yeah. But then when she figures that out, she then does what she can to change and to try to make things better. Mm-hmm. And I think as far as like realistic heroic characters go, that's probably the best, because a perfect character isn't like really, you're never going to reach that level. So they're not really somebody you can kind of admire and try to strive towards. I think it's better to have kind of a flawed person who realizes when they fuck up and then, try to do what they can to fix it, because that's probably the best any of us can do at the end of the day.
Well, and Utena is great because it feels like her arc is really entrenched in and responding to like the world and the stakes in that world, where I think a lot of, especially in shonen, and I mean, I know this is shoujo, but it has shonen elements with all the tournament shit and all. Mm-hmm. A lot of those protagonists feel very stock in a way that isn't quite so responsive to what's going on around them. They all have basically the same arc. Whereas, like, Utena's desire to be the prince and to help people to be the prince doesn't happen without the very specific environment of Otori.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's kind of a good thing that the entirety of Utena does, is every character is very much a product of their, like, they're all individuals with their own, kind of like personalities and goals, but they're also very much a product of this prince, princess, witch dynamic that's sort of been infused in their world. But yeah, Utena is very much like, she is the main character, like she's the perfect main character for this story too, not just like in general as a good kind of character.
Utena is a great protagonist, but I don't know that she would be as great a protagonist in any other story.
Yeah, I think I see what you mean there. Like, yeah, she's very much for this piece of fiction, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And that's honestly one of the strengths of the show, I think, is that every character is so perfectly crafted for their role, but none of it feels forced.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't say that anything in Utena exactly feels organic.
No, because it's a very deliberately, like, by design, it's constructed. Everything is fake. It's right. Plateau's allegory of the cave, as long as we're getting pretentious.
Yeah, I mean, but it is. It all kind of feels like it's happening on a stage. Like the school. One of the things I noticed the most recent rewatch that I really enjoyed was you never really see people move from like one room of the school to the next. It's more like the set changes behind them. So you don't really get a feel for how the school is connected, because it doesn't really appear to be. And so it kind of gives it that sense of, everything is very much a story, is a play, is, the shadow puppet girls. but the characters themselves still feel real despite being kind of in this very clearly fictional world.
Right, because they become real as they struggle against the roles they've been assigned.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And the concept of struggling against the role that you're born into is something that's very, like, culturally in Japan, it's a lot more subversive than I feel like it would seem to us as people in the US. Mm-hmm. Because of that concept of that you should accept the roles that you were born into and to do your best in it, even if it's not personally what you want, personally what you feel like would be the most comfortable place for you. So they're given these roles and they're expected to grow into them. They're expected to become adults who are continuing to play this out, and they have to learn how to fight against it.
And it's interesting because it is a very Japanese thought of ethos that concerns this show at its core, and yet at the same time it feels like a very worldly series because it borrows, like, you know, Demian and Gnosticism is very, well, Demian specifically is very German in World War I, and it uses a lot of Western fairy tale tropes, but this underpinning philosophy is very central to where the anime was made.
Yeah, but at the same, I've seen a lot of people, they don't want to put Utena on like their short list of shows you give somebody as like a starter anime. And I would agree, it's definitely not like the first show I would show somebody, but I had only seen 3 or 4 other anime before I saw Utena, and maybe it's because I was younger, and so like the weirdness of it didn't really click for me because I hadn't been exposed to as much fiction at that point. But I feel like because there is so much about it that's drawn from Western fairy tales, and the school itself is kind of Greco-Roman style, I think it's one where you can give it to somebody and they don't necessarily have to know a bunch about Japanese culture to be able to jump into it. And so in that regard, I don't necessarily see it as I see it as like a decent starter show because it's not like, okay, well, here's a book about Japanese culture that you should probably read so you understand how schools work and how,
right.
you know what I mean? Like, you don't really need that with Utena. It's very much got this kind of international, almost Western. There's enough in there that you can jump into it and kind of understand where they're drawing from. Which I think is kind of cool because, I mean, you know, you guys were talking about how it has this kind of Japanese core to it in terms of accepting your roles. But then you realize that those prince-princess stories are so deeply embedded in our own culture that maybe this idea of sticking to your role is a lot stronger in our own societies than we maybe like to pretend it is.
Absolutely.
It's true. Yeah, I would say that Utena has a fairly high barrier to entry, but the barrier to entry isn't cultural necessarily. It's just sort of the willingness to go along with it and to sort of do the level of reading that it takes to really get the show, because it's not a show that you just kind of sit back and watch. It's a show that you have to think about to get, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend to someone just when, like, I wouldn't hand it to someone if they sought it out just as they're getting into anime as a medium. I don't think it would be a problem, but I wouldn't be like, oh, you're getting an anime, I know this great one.
I will say that I think it definitely is a show that a person who hasn't watched a lot of anime could write off as, that's a weird anime thing, because I have escaped from the 90s where the only anime that exists is Urotsuki Doji and Pokemon. But
and Ninja Scroll.
Oh my god. But the real barrier, I think, is an ability to read visual media. I had a friend who absolutely adored this series who had almost never watched any anime except for, like, the, you know, Akira and the occasional Miyazaki movie, who just adored it, and she was an art film student. And I think the show does want to help its reader, like a lot of the Black Rose saga, I think, exists to, like, take the viewer by the hand and teach them how to read visual symbolism with all, like, the pointing hands and stuff. But it's still, it still can be, you know, to someone who's just had high school English and maybe knows the very basics of reading symbolism in text, but not in in a visual medium, it's just fucking opaque.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you have to be you have to be able to really read visual language, which a lot of people don't develop the literacy with, whether it's because they're used to being passive viewers, or sometimes there's an element of snobbery to it, like people who think that the written word is inherently superior to the visual image.
Yeah, as an actual published writer, I'm going to go ahead and call bullshit on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. Like, that's a fight I've gotten into with a few people.
Wow. Yeah. No, the visual work in that show is incredible. I actually give Utena a lot of credit because the first time I watched it, I had not taken that high school English course, and I give Utena a lot of credit for, I think, without me even realizing it, kind of teaching me to understand like how to spot, recurring images, or figure out kind of what a metaphor is, or how this thing relates to this thing later in the story. It was a weird primer, I guess, again, as a middle school kid, kind of jumping into it. But I think maybe that's why I tend to not be as, oh, well, make sure you understand how visual imagery works when you watch this, otherwise you won't get it. Because I watched it when I was 13 and I didn't completely get it, but I loved it. And again, it was because I was able to connect with the characters and their journeys, and, kind of like, and teasing out the mystery of, what's going on at Otorio Academy. And so the thing I love about Utena, and the reason I kind of shy away from that idea of like, well, don't watch it unless you have unless you're really willing to dig into it that first time through, is because I think you can enjoy it on a very just base, like, here are some really interesting people at a weird school, trying to live their lives, as, with the central friendship that turns into a romance, and the way the different characters kind of interact with each other.
Hey, if I hear one more comment about how Utena and Anthy are just friends, I am going to have to kick somebody out of something tall.
I'm sorry, I used to be that person.
Me too. I'm sorry.
We apologize.
I as the stand-in for the entire queer community, hereby give you my absolving blessing.
Well, thank you.
Oh yeah.
I try to give myself a little bit of leeway on that because as an ace kid who didn't know they were ace, it was really important for me to have friendship stories. So I think that's the main reason I really clung to, like, no, Utena and Anthy are really good friends. You can have a really good friendship story. It's not all about romance, guys. God. Like, I had definitely had that pushback against stories like that. And I mean, I wasn't that way all the time. Like, when I watched the movie, I was like, oh yeah, no, they're totally in a romance in the movie. But I saw them as like different stories, so I didn't see a problem with that being a romance and the series being a friendship story. But now I rewatched it. I'm like, oh, this is a beautiful little romance. So I have no problem with it now.
Yeah. But going back to like the visual language thing, I almost think that your willingness to go with it has a lot to do with how young you were when you watched it. Because it was the same thing for me. I watched it when I was really young. I was just like, well, this is kind of weird, but it's cool, so I'm just gonna go with it. But I feel like an adult would have a different reaction to it. Adults are a little bit less open-minded about things if they're not trained to think in a certain way.
Yeah, I guess if you're not already used to kind of, sort of abstract or sort of visually kind of strange media, then jumping into Utena would be very kind of surprising and off-putting.
Yeah, and Utena was actually almost my intro to that sort of approach, because when I was in college I had to take a composition course, but the composition courses all had different themes, and the one I took was high school movies since the 1980s, and one of the supplementary movies that you could choose to watch and write about for credit was Adolescence of Utena.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the professor was like a big anime geek.
Nice.
I mean, I guess.
This was the class that he walked in the first day doing a Napoleon Dynamite impression for like 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
And then he turned his chair around backwards and
I mean, he was a grad student, so he was younger. But like, I did my first 10-page term paper about the use of cars as visual metaphor in the TV show and in the movie, and comparing those. So Utena was really like, it was sort of the first thing that I really looked at that way, speaking in terms of visuals. So yeah, that's just, Utena's been like my first thing for a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, I definitely feel that too.
I wonder if there is an element that it helped to, I definitely think that you're right. It's one of those shows that you need something going in, either a familiarity with anime or a willingness to watch it as, visual or what, but just like, you can't go into it blind with none of these things.
Yeah.
Or, but I do wonder if it changes things for, say, a younger audience to watch it now who isn't as familiar with the 80s and even early 90s anime that it was responding to. Because I caught a glimpse of somebody who was watching it for the first time, who I think is a little bit younger, and was, asking questions about, well, why is it really necessary to have all this incest in here? Kind of, with maybe not necessarily knowing that, yes, this is a very pertinent comment on how anime then and now, but worse, tends to play with the theory of those lines, but when you actually confront the reality of what that would look like, that's an unpleasant and abusive thing, and Nanami is my favorite character, and I may have feels about that entire arc.
I was gonna ask, I was like, we haven't gotten Vry's favorite character yet. I can't imagine who it is.
She's such a she's so awful, but she's also so pathetic, and I really love the fact that she's a foil to Anthy in a quiet way that the series never really overtly comments on. But there's just that quiet secondary arc going on where Anthy just hates her, but is also kind of trying to help her.
Yeah, she's younger than everyone else, so she just does a lot of really, really dumb shit.
She did kill a kitten.
She's like, what?
I can't let it go for this. She did kill a kitten.
She did.
Yeah, she did.
I mean, kids are the worst, but I feel like after she's maybe the person who might get out next, because she came so far in one run.
Rewatching it was really fun with Nanami, because she's one of those characters where again, when you're 13 and you're like, oh, that kid, because you're at about the same age she is, it's really easy to just hate her and just be really happy when bad things happen to her. So, Take Care of Ms. Nanami was a really cathartic episode, because it's like, yeah, you take that, mean girl.
Yeah, no, Nanami is definitely one of those characters where, like, in real life, and especially if you're in that age group, that's not a person you can sympathize with. Yes, maybe they're going through their whole thing, but they're still making your life hell in the meanwhile.
Yeah. But then rewatching it as an adult, I did wind up with a lot more sympathy for her, and again, like you said, like the amount of growth she has over the course of the series is really unique and remarkable, given where she starts. And they do this with a few of the characters in the early arc, like she and Saionji especially. They start off as kind of like these sort of like dramatic, threatening figures, and then the deeper you get into the show, you realize that they have just as little power as pretty much everybody else, and then they become a lot more sympathetic and kind of pathetic as the story progresses.
I think even though it's not really fair, because he's not really much better off than anyone else, but I think that's why I have the hardest time giving Touga slack, is because compared to all the other characters, like, he is ultimately pathetic and fooling himself, but he does have more power than basically every other teenage character.
He wants to be like Akio.
Which is a mistake.
He's just... Yeah. Right, well, yeah, it is a mistake. But, he's just... he's the boy who has been given a model for masculinity, and he aspires to it without realizing how damaging it really is.
Right. Like, he thinks he's the hero.
He does, and he really is like kind of the zealot of the story. Like, everyone else kind of has some sort of personal goal that they're heading towards, and then they kind of map these big ideals onto it. So like Miki's shining thing is really just his relationship with his sister. Jerry's miracles have to do with Shiori. Like there's a personal element to everybody's stories. But Touga's really is this very kind of zealot sort of, I'm going to become this heroic figure and, rise to the top of the power structure and change the world. And so he becomes, as the story progresses, he becomes like very isolated. And to me, that's the thing I find kind of sad about his story arc, is he really has no emotional connections by the end of it, where everyone else does. And so it kind of shows you how even when it looks like you're the person in charge with lots of power and kind of living that dream that society tells you should live in terms of aggressive masculinity, like at the end of the day, his life is very empty.
Yeah, and I guess that's...
he is the patriarchy hurts everybody character.
Yeah.
Definitely, like, in a way that's not as obvious as Saionji, but is still very true. And I guess maybe that's what's kind of sweet about his relationship with Saionji, whether it's a friendship or the definitely sublimated crush feels that Saionji is carrying around, is that he's a person in the spectrum of privilege who can still reach Touga, but also pull him back a little bit. Because he's poisoned from the same well.
Yeah, I said he was isolated from everyone, but I was thinking more kind of in like the Black Rose arc especially, which I was kind of brushing up on before we got to this. But yeah, you're right. By the end of the story, he and Saionji have kind of repaired their relationship, and so there is sort of a hope there where it's like, well, okay, if you can both back off of these, ideals of toxic masculinity, you might be okay.
Maybe you're gonna go through the wash a lot more times. To wash some of that trash off, you trash boys.
Yes. I have a confession. I really liked Touga the first time I watched the show. I was like convinced that he was going to be redeemable. And
so
part of it I think was
manga.
Because I was reading, so the way I watched it was like I was watching the first season almost simultaneously with the manga, and then I immediately jumped into the movie. And in the movie there is a lot more kind of depth and complexity to his character and more.
He's a very different character in the movie.
Yeah, he's much
I'd
more.
say he is the most different,
kind of a tragic figure in the film.
Although I do wonder if the abuse backstory is meant to be read back into the series, because it does.
I think so.
Explain how the transformation happens between this kind of warm kid that Saionji remembers and that very cold, distant, sex is power kind of figure in a very sad way.
It really does.
I think it's been a while since I've watched past the student council's arc. It's been a while since I've watched that too, but it's been longer. But I do think it's alluded to in the TV series. I feel like I remember something like that.
Not that I recall, but you could be right.
It's
just always a...
Yeah, sorry, the one thing they do no, you're good. In the series, there are references to kind of like the adoption element and like between he and Nanami and their parents maybe not being their blood relatives, which does sort of feed into the things you learn in the film. So I think they are. I would say that they probably are intended to be kind of the same story. It's interesting that got completely left out of the TV series because it does really kind of change the way you look at Touga as a character. But I would say that you can easily map that back onto the TV character as well.
Yeah,
definitely.
That's right. It's going way back to sort of talking about the like how the show is sort of responding to popular shojo tropes of the 90s, and like that made me think of the scene where the amusement park episode.
Holy fuck.
Yeah.
I still have arguments with people over whether that's statutory rape. By the way, it is.
Yes, it is.
End of discussion.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it's not just statutory rape, because first of all, I missed that episode in like my first 2 times watching the series, because it's like, oh, it's a recap episode. Bloop.
Oh my gosh, that really changes the feel of the last half of the show too.
Yeah, it really affected my understanding of the show. I think it felt very clear to me that this was an encounter that would normally be romanticized. But first of all, the stop signs. A lot of people don't notice that when it flashes to the road, the kanji that's flashing on the road says stop.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
So I think a lot of people miss that, because that is a 100% clear indicator of what was going on. But like the way Utena was babbling and sort of mentally disconnecting from the experience, like it was not a good encounter. And her talking about, oh, thank you for this night, is almost, it's almost like, oh, I should desire this. Like, this is what I've been wanting. So,
right, it's not dissimilar to the incest to Nanami's issues with Touga, I think, in that it's it's a fun theoretical fantasy to be wooed by an older person, but the reality of that is ugly and can be very emotionally damaging. Because you are an adult and this is a child. What the fuck are you doing?
Right, and that encounter significantly messes Utena up for the rest of the show. Which, yeah, like I said, not seeing that part really changes your perspective.
Yeah, you really can't skip the recap episodes in Utena. It's the one show where you cannot skip the recap episodes.
I do wonder,
never skip the recap episodes.
If that's a trick that Ikuhara like borrowed from Ano, because the two are definitely friendly, like to the point where, yeah, okay, you're not admitting that you stole the ending of Utena for the second Rebuild movie, but we all saw what you did.
I still need to see the Rebuild movies, but now knowing that going in would be fascinating.
They well, there's, I guess, spoilers, whatever. I have the Rebuild movies sure do exist, but there's a scene in the second movie where Shinji is doing the more traditional masculinity that the movies have decided he needs to do. Not that I'm bitter. And he rescues Rei from being eaten by an angel in a replication straight up of the hand scene from the last episode of Utena.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's sure a thing. I have derailed the conversation with my
I was going to say, what were we talking about before we got salty about the Rebuild movies?
Tropes, 90s tropes, and how it definitely, like, I think this show certainly transcends its time and is definitely applicable no matter what age you are, but it helps to know what was coming out around it.
That's very true, because that was maybe even more so than now even. There was very much kind of a push in. You had a lot of, especially shojo series, where the high schooler falling in love with like with the grown up was kind of like a romantic storyline, or some of the incest stuff that was coming out around that time as well. It was really all kind of played as very romantic, and Utena sort of looks at those and goes, no, there's something deeply wrong with this.
Right. Like it's a nice idea until you actually enact those things beyond a subtexty level that was all those anime would ever do. Sorry, I'm thinking about the one sour note in Cardcaptor Sakura again now, and I'm sad.
Oh, yeah, no, I was thinking about that too. Oh, man.
That show is so good and so sweet, and then there's that one subplot, you're like, Clamp, no. Clamp, what are you doing? Stop.
Clamp's got some really, really weird ideas about what is acceptable in romance. Because there's a lot of teacher-student loving in Clamp series. It's bad.
Yeah, that's one of my big nopes in media. That one's high up on the list.
Yep. Same here.
And
because the power dynamics are just, and that was the thing they did so well with Utena too, was they really made a point of highlighting that it's not necessarily an age. I mean, it is an age thing, but it's not, because it's really about the power dynamics. Like, because Touga's 17, 18, like he's technically probably not really a kid at this point in the story, but his scenes with Akio are still just loaded with that sense of something is deeply wrong here because Akio has so much power over him.
Right, and Anthy is as old as Akio is technically, but her romance with Utena doesn't really raise flags for me because they are ultimately equals.
Yeah, and the show takes care to show them in that equality dynamic. Like their relationship builds as they become closer to seeing each other on that same plane.
And Akio is such an interesting figure because he's one of the few characters who I would call sexual, and he's sexy in an adult kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not the only other character who I can really think of who is that self-possessed in their sexuality is when Sayo Yamamoto did The Woman Called Fujiko Mine.
That's true. You don't see that a lot in anime, those kind of adult characters who just kind of exude that sense of like sexual power.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true.
And then there's movie Akio.
And and that makes like all of the scenes of Akio like taking pictures of Touga and Saionji like doing sexy poses on his car. Like he's just exploiting these children left and right. Utena is not escapism.
It kind of starts off that way. Like the first arc is really fun and there's a lot of silly episodes and Nanami gets chased by elephants and it's great. But yeah, the deeper you get into it, kind of the darker it gets. And then it really does become emotionally fulfilling, but also exhausting, for sure.
It's amazing how I mean, considering this aired, I believe, at like a 6 p.m. primetime slot, the amount of stuff it crams in there and how just it brings you out emotionally.
And
by the end.
Anthy stabbed Utena on Christmas Day.
Oh my god! I did not know that.
No, you didn't know that?
No, that's a fun
Yeah.
fact.
That episode...
That's what we call a pain fact. That's a bad pain fact.
Yeah, Utena, let's see. Yeah. Oh no, the finale was on Christmas Eve, 1997. And Christmas Eve in Japan is a romantic holiday, which I think is just beautifully messed up. And I don't know if it was planned that way to have that episode air on Christmas. Probably not. Maybe it's probably just a coincidence.
Just how the airing schedule worked out, but it does
Yeah.
kind of work out. That's fun.
And it's such
It really is.
beautiful ending. Like, I love that this story starts with Utena, but it ends with Anthy. And that just, my heart.
The way the series builds Anthy is, because, I mean, they do kind of, I feel like they do a good job of having the audience change their perspective of her sort of as Utena does. Because I know the first time I watched, especially that first arc, which was all I had for a little while there, it's kind of easy to just write her off as sort of just a damsel-esque kind of empty character who's just sort of there to get bounced around between everybody else. And then as you get into it, you're like, oh no, I was falling into the same patterns that the rest of the student council was, as you learn more about her circumstances and her just terribly sad backstory.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people go too far to attribute like every bad thing that happens to everyone retroactively to Anthy, but it really is incredible, and heartbreaking, the things that she does, which are sometimes incredibly awful, because that's just the only recourse left to her. I love Anthy.
Yeah, I was gonna say we really haven't.
We've
bounced around a lot of the characters. We haven't really talked about Anthy up to this point, and how the story is. Again, there's so many ways you can read this and so many different ways you can kind of approach it and look at it. And I love that about it, because every time I get into it, I, get to see something a little bit different about it than I did prior. But that element of it kind of being at heart a story about somebody trapped in a terribly abusive relationship finding a way out of that is really beautiful and inspiring. And that last scene where all Utena does is just reach out her hand and Anthy takes it. It's just, I cry like a little baby every time.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful is the thing. Unironically, I'm tearing up a little bit.
Yeah.
They're very good.
This show, yeah, it's very near and dear.
I am, sad and slightly angry forever that, Mega House made that Utena figure, and they had a prototype of Anthy that apparently they just up and canceled.
Aww.
And it was really beautiful, of her in her Rosebud bride costume.
That would have been a great set.
I know.
And Anthy, yeah, she's such a fantastic character in her own right. Like she deserves her own figure. She's such a hard character to appreciate the first go round, because so much of what she does is off screen by design.
Yeah, exactly. Like, when I first watched the student council arc, I was not excited by Anthy at all.
Right. Like, the fact that she posted the letter, Wakaba's letter, you could never... It's not one of those things that you could figure it out from context clues, really. You have to know.
Yeah. Anthy is definitely, what makes rewatching the show absolutely essential to understanding it. Because there's so much that she does that's off screen.
And I wonder if maybe, because a show like, Evangelion's famous for being weird and mind-screwy, but that is a show where I think if you kind of knew the baseline going in, you could get what you needed on one viewing. You really have to watch Utena twice, and it is 39 episodes long.
Yeah, I mean...
Here, have 80 episodes.
39 episodes seems really long nowadays, now that everything's 13 episodes, but it wasn't really considered that long back in the day. Nowadays, everything's just one season. But, in the 90s, 52-episode series were not uncommon. Especially for shojo.
That's a good point.
Right, and especially, in the heyday of Gundam, where that was just a done thing.
Fushigi Yugi. 52 episodes. We'll do another
and,
episode about
and
Fushigi
3 OVAs
someday.
Oh
I'm
my
sure.
god, we will do that, won't we? And then Dee gets to try to explain how much she loves it and how flawed it is.
Oh,
that'll be good times. But yeah, no, you're right, and I don't think it's one of those shows where you want to tell somebody off the bat, oh well, here's Anthy's backstory, so you know going into it, because the experience of having your understanding of the characters changed is part of what makes the Utena experience like so unique and important, I think. And I think that's true with I think most great narratives find a way to kind of challenge your understanding of characters as you go. And, finding out everything about Anthy and Akio and, what her circumstances have been that surprise is like vital to watching the series as well, I think, because it does kind of challenge the audience's own assumptions and perceptions as well as it does the characters, which is so great. Active storytelling is wonderful.
Right, and the whole thing where initially people are like, you can skip the Black Rose saga.
Do not skip the Black Rose saga.
No, you cannot.
Yeah, just Ikuhara is so... that man is a trip.
I love him.
And I think this is his longest, not including Sailor Moon, because, I like what he did with Sailor Moon, but it's also not entirely his baby. I don't think it's coincidence that this is his longest, like, basically solo project, and also his most perfectly paced. Like, I like Yurikuma Arashi,
I had a hard time with Yurikuma.
It needed more time.
I had a really hard time with Yurikuma. I had trouble emotionally engaging with it. Penguin Utena and Penguin Drum, both of them, I was able to get into the characters and the story as well as digesting the imagery. But Yurikuma was so just like everything's a symbol. See,
and I had the opposite problem with Penguin, where like I was able to just kind of go along with what Yurikuma was doing and follow where it went. When I will finish it eventually, but I just stalled out on Penguin Drum.
Penguin Drum it's interesting because, like, Penguin Drum is probably the densest Ikuhara series. However, I think it is most accessible to, like we were talking about before, it's most accessible to people who don't want to just, like, have to read all of the visual language to really understand what's going on. Like, there's a lot of there are symbols that are very obviously symbols.
Do you think this hat is important?
But, like, the child broiler. Yeah. But at the same time,
I don't think Vry's gotten to the good stuff yet.
No, Vry definitely never got to the good stuff.
I may have stalled out during
fair.
Ringo's
That was
arc.
where I was watching it as it aired, and I got into the kind of the Ringo arc, which is like episodes 5 through 7 or something, and I hit a point with it where I was like, this needs to start moving someplace sooner. I might actually just give up on it. And then it does, and the second half is fantastic.
I didn't consciously give up on it. Hulu took it away from me.
Jeez, Hulu.
Is this streaming anywhere right now?
Penguin Drum.
If
you don't have the Blu-rays, which I do, but Vry doesn't live close enough for me to throw them at them, so that wouldn't work out.
I mean, I do live close to like I do live close to like one of 6 actual brick and mortar stores that sell anime, but
that's fair. But yeah, if it ever comes back, definitely finish it out. It's truthfully, I think.
For sure, because
Ikuhara
completionism.
I think I liked Yurikuma better than Penguin Drum at the end of the day. And part of it was I was blogging it, so I was watching it a lot. I really struggled with the first 3 episodes, but then after that, I got into it, and I got really, really a little too attached to the bears, and so I was.
Yeah, no, there's some shit happens there.
Yeah, so by the last episode, I was tearing up and was so happy, and just it's one of those series that you almost have to watch it all in one go, because it's really like a novel rather than how some anime are kind of like episode by episode you can talk about them. Like I think Utena is like that, because each episode is kind of its own self-contained like character arc.
Right, because there are so many individual
and with the dual format, like you do have an episode where it's like, and today we're going to focus on Miki, and today we're going to focus on Juri. So you can kind of watch it like a couple episodes this week, and then you could watch it week by week on TV, and I think it would have been fine. Yurikuma is very much one story. And so trying to watch it week in and week out, I think was very difficult. And it's one of those where you almost can't discuss, you almost can't review the early episodes without having the end of the story. Because again, and that's Ikuhara's thing, is every show there's some kind of reveal that changes your understanding of who these people are and what they were doing. And Yurikuma definitely pulls that rug out from under you a few times as it goes.
But I think even at the end, it is a series I like because I was invested enough in that central relationship, but it is also a series that frustrates me because it had 12 episodes, and I'm over here waving my hand like, hey, Ikuhara, are you going to do anything with the fact that all these characters resolutely call each other friends even though they have blatantly sexual relationships? Are you going to actually come back to this issue of the male gaze? Ikuhara, come back!
Yeah, he had to cram a lot in, for sure, and there's definitely things that could have been expanded on. The friend thing, gosh, don't quote me on that because I've not read nearly enough Yuri manga to be able to say this for sure. But I think that's kind of a trope of the genre that he's very much addressing.
No, yeah,
it's like a class S sort of thing.
Intentionally playing on it, but he had it in there, but never did anything with it. It was just like a background thing that was doing the trope, not commenting on the trope. It's
interesting how the Utena fandom has endured over all of the years. How, in this day and age, anime fandom for individual series tends to be very flash in the pan. Not a lot of shows have staying power. It's all sort of regarded as disposable. But Utena, you look around online and there's still all this fantastic analysis going on. There's readings of the characters that I've never seen before popping up on Tumblr all the time. There's fan art coming out the ears, and it's just a series that really speaks to so many people to the point that it is becoming cross-generational, because it has been 20 years now. That's about 2/3 of how long I've been alive.
And I mean, you could say that at least some of it is because it came out in the 90s when there was A, less anime being made, and B, less available in the West. But that only accounts for a little bit.
Yeah, because there's still a lot of 90s shows that are very much forgotten, that were good shows. How many shows from 1997 can you name?
Yeah, no, Utena is definitely special, and it rewards people who stick with it, people who invest in it, and its characters are memorable both in design and in writing and in acting. We really only talked about Utena, but the acting is really solid across the board.
Yeah, all of the actors do a phenomenal job. I can never actually remember her name, but the woman who plays Anthy, she is phenomenal.
God, I love her.
The amount of sort of subtle emotion and little hitches she puts into the character's voice, in a character who really does kind of have to be like this sort of mask of placidity for so much of the show. She's able to just put so much depth and personality into her that gets completely lost in the dub, tragically.
Boy, and we begin and end with the terrible dub. Oh, can I tell my favorite terrible dub story? So, apparently Crispin Freeman has the story he tells at cons. Yeah, where he had to go to the dubbing team and be like, so Jury's a closeted lesbian, and they're like, what? No, she's, like, we can't, or rather,
they're all like, what is her deal? Like, why is she so angry? And Crispin's like, are you kidding? Like, are you not?
Do you not understand?
And I think that speaks a lot for how much care and thought Crispin puts into his characters compared to a lot of dub actors sometimes. Like I know dub actors are working really hard. This is not meant to be a slam on dub actors, but they're also all they have to not. They're all freelancers. They all have to chase after whatever roles they can. They don't necessarily have time to sit down and think about the characters. A lot of them flip through the script, get a sense of what's going on, and then go in and do their best.
Right, pay the month's rent, go on, do the next thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta.
Listen, my dad was a starving actor for a while. I know how it is. But yeah, Crispin really, he puts a lot of time into. He has said that at conventions that he goes in and he watches as much of the series as it takes for him to really understand what the character's like main driving motivation is.
And that's probably why his toga is the most listenable part of
this is one of those moments that will stay with me forever. I think it's in the first episode after Utena beats Saionji. There is no way to say this line without it sounding awkward, so this is not a knock on him, but he busts out an, "Oh yes, baby, you've lit a fire in my heart," and it is the funniest damn thing. And
that line
always stuck with me.
Poor Christmas.
Yeah, there's no way to say that line without it sounding ridiculous. And it was amazing. That's my strongest memory of the dub. But yeah, no, sorry. Circling back to the show's staying power, I think that also really speaks to how either ahead of its time or just straight up timeless it is as a series, because there's a lot of stuff that came out in the 90s that I enjoyed at the time and then I watch now and I'm like, oh, that's super dated.
I'm afraid to watch Slayers.
There are definitely things in Slayers that have not aged well. I still love it. It's still one of my favorite shows. But
who remembers Hyper Police?
I do not.
Who remembers Those Who Hunt Elves?
I do, but
Tenchi Muyo.
Yeah, I mean, I really there's a handful of shows that have kind of come out as being sort of these classic masterpieces, and for a while, just because Utena was so hard to track down, it was kind of one of those almost like, I hesitate to use the term underground because it makes it sound like we're all wearing hipster glasses while we talk about it, but I mean, maybe we were. I don't know. It was all online. But it was one of those that kind of like you'd hear people raving about Evangelion and Cowboy Bebop for good reason. Like those are also excellent shows from the 90s for sure. But you wouldn't. Utena was always one of those where it would be like almost this sort of quiet undercurrent of, have you heard about Utena? It's really hard to track down, but it's amazing. You should find it. Mm-hmm. Like you had to go on quests, as we all mentioned, to get your hands on it for a while there. But it's still, even with that difficulty of finding it, it has still withstood the test of time and kind of become a classic. And more, especially with Tumblr, with it now being readily available on YouTube. Thanks, Nozomi.
Yay!
I think more and more people are coming into it, and because it does have that sort of timeless quality where it is still topical and important in the stories that it and the themes that it tells. I think it's getting a little bit more of a boost in terms of popularity and really kind of cementing itself as, one of the all-time best.
Writing about Utena was the first thing that I did as a blogger, and was it fairly early on for both of you when you were getting into blogging? Yeah, I had been
pretty. It was the third series, I guess. I really did long for, but it was the longest series that I really packed a lunch, because right before that I did a woman called Fujiko Mine, which is only 13 episodes.
Yeah, it was a fairly early one for me. I wouldn't have done it. I mean, again, major thanks to Vrai for getting me kind of on that beat. But it was one of those series that was so big and so close to my heart that I hadn't really thought about doing a series on it for a while, and then when I started reading Vry's post, I was like, oh, I want to rewatch this. Oh, I want to talk about it. And then it sort of spiraled into this.
And I'm so glad you did. Your posts are great.
That was so fun doing the back and forth there. I guess this is the part where we're plugging our work.
Yeah. I think as a final note, I would say that if you can, I've heard buzz about a Blu-ray set. I don't know if that's happening.
Nozomi said it was one of their goals for the year.
Right. Well, maybe wait for that. I don't know, but I have the DVD sets, and they really are
They're incredible. They all come with art booklets, and there's translated interviews and creator commentary, and they give you a lot of extra. The bang for your buck is incredible because you do get so much supplementary material with them too.
Yeah, there are so many recent series where more recent series where I feel like I will never talk about them because there's nothing to add to the I don't have anything to add to the conversation. It's been combed over and discussed from front to back. It's no longer fertile ground. But like I said, Utena just all the time. Like there's some fascinating new reading. There's something to. There's a different perspective, and that's incredible.
It's good. I believe that is the that is the conclusion we have all come to. That their Utena series, it is good.
That was our thesis all along.
That's our shocking conclusion. It's pretty good, y'all. All right, so since we kind of dipped into it a little bit, would you two like to plug the stuff you do when you are not helping around with AniFem?
Sure. I'll go ahead. I
go first.
Fight to the death to go. Who goes first?
Okay. I run my own blog, Heroine Problem. Heroine has an E. So I have a heroine problem. I do much like on Anime Feminist, feminist analysis of and criticism of anime and manga. Heroineproblem.com.
Yeah, and I run the Josei Next Door, a friendly neighborhood anime blog. I guess I've been running it for almost 3 years now. Wow, a lot of episode commentaries, some essays involved. I did a whole Sailor Moon newbie review series that was super fun, which is actually how Ryan and I met, so that was great. And kind of similar focus. I mean, one of the reasons I think Amelia reached out to me, because we didn't know each other at all before AniFem. I think one of the reasons she reached out to me is a lot of the work I had done there was already sort of slanted towards feminism, gender issues, like in particular, and kind of queer representation and things like that. So that's kind of what the Josei Next Door has sort of expanded into, I guess. It's been fun.
Well, and do you still do contributions at Anime Evo?
Yeah, that's where I'm doing Rakugo. And I post all those on my blog, so you can link to them pretty easily. But yeah, I do. I'm a regular contributor there. I do one series per season, pretty much for them, and which is nice. I think a lot of people think I just do like recaps there or reviews, but it's analysis and commentary like exclusively. I'm not really interested in doing a recap format there. So I do those, and then occasionally I'll write for, I have Anime Feminist now. I used to do some stuff for the Mary Sue. So yeah, my name's been sprinkled around the interwebs a little bit at this point.
And if for some reason you're not tired of my voice yet, I run a blog called Fashionable Tinfoil Accessories, where I don't have a lot of anime stuff up there right now. I think all of the ongoing series I'm working on right now are Western-based. I recap Steven Universe. I'm rewatching Gravity Falls. I am doing a series on Gankutsuo while also working through my complicated feelings about Anne Rice. Don't ask. And I also have a movie podcast because by law everyone is allotted one called Trash and Treasures. So if you want to listen to me garble queer representation issues about weird trash movies, that is the podcast for you. And otherwise, you can find us all hanging around at AniFem, and hopefully we've provided meaty, tasty, delicious discourse for you on this day. And you've promised that Fushigi Yugi podcast now. I hope you know that. And people are champing at the bit.
I'll have to
they want it.
I'm picking up my blog summaries of that too. I've got one on the queue.
Oh yeah.
They're fantastic. If you should listen. Caitlin, your tweets about that show are truly magnificent.
Thank you.
All right, I think that wraps us up here. Thanks you guys so much for joining me.
Thank you guys for
kind
of scheduling this and sort of encouraging me to be a part of it, because I was very nervous about speaking to people in the interweb lands, and this was lots of fun. So, thanks guys.
Yeah. Podcasts are really
great.
just a conversation that you let other people listen to.
Yeah, definitely. And to all of you out there hopefully listening, this has been a really great, and let us know what you think of this kind of one series conversational format, and if you'd like to see more of that in future, or any feedback you've got, we'd love to hear it. But for now, I think let's take this podcast and sign off.
Great.
We'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye guys.
Hey everyone, Vrai here. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked this podcast, you can find more of our work at www.animefeminist.com. You can talk to us on Twitter @AnimeFeminist, on Facebook at facebook.com/animefem, or visit us on patreon.com/animefeminist, which helps us keep the lights on and pay all of the writers who submit stuff to our website. And if you're already a patron, please stop by and have a chat with us. We'd love to expand our reach and really get an idea of what our readers would like to see us discussing so that we can better serve you in the future. All right, until next time, bye.